The biggest Ukrainian drone strike in the war so far hit, among other targets, the harbor of Novorossiysk, while satellite pictures show that the Russians lost irreplaceable planes on the Ukrainian ATACMS strikes on Belbek airfield on the Crimean Peninsula. We'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front line in the war in Ukraine and about mobilization, troop generation, and a lot of other stuff in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. One quick thing at the beginning. Last video, I by mistake talked about Peskov when I meant Patrushev. I am aware of this and I want to apologize for it. And at the same time, I want to thank Winnie7 for the book Coup d'etat, a practical handbook by Edward and Lutwork to help me educate myself for all eventualities. Thank you very much. Initially, we start with the overall situation. Ukraine said in the night from 15th to 16th of May, they did a successful drone strike on the Basalt factory in Tula. Basalt is the name, not the material. The factory itself is producing, among other things, ammunition. So far, videos show activity in the area, explosions, sirens going on car theft alarms going on, etc. But I have not seen proof of a successful strike and of the damage that was done. But what we do have is a drone strike on the Crimean Peninsula on Russian targets in the following night. We see a video here where a Russian, probably a truck driver, is complaining about the huge number of Ukrainian drones. You just saw one passing, and in a moment he'll see the next one. In total, the Russians were claiming 123 drones were destroyed over the Crimean Peninsula, as well as 25 naval drones in the Black Sea. Now, we have no way of proving how close the numbers are to reality, but it shows at the very least the scale that the Russians claim has happened. And we do know that the strikes have hit something. There is geolocalization about the strikes, and we see videos, pictures of detonations that happened in the background, a long number of items that were struck. So far, it seems clear that the harbor was struck, the refinery and fuel tanks in Novorossiysk. Also, other strikes hit the installations for railway networks as well. So a big strike, and it seems to have been successful. Obviously, it was to be expected that some of the drones or a lot of the drones will be shot down, but it seems to be clear that a fair number of them came through as well. From Novorossiysk, the reports are saying 35 explosions were audible. That is obviously not fully conclusive, as some of the explosions, or a lot of the explosions, might be from air defense shooting down the drones as well, but at least 35 explosions were recorded from locals. Also, the oil refinery in Tuapse was also hit. So let's switch to the developments along the front line now. The Russians have advanced at various parts in the north. When we begin at the northern front, now we have a first geolocalization here directly at the outskirts of Lipsy. That's where the Russians were last spotted. This should be more or less, as you can see here, is the reservoir or the lake here, and this should be roughly here. I'm not wasting our time to look for the exact position, but we see it's several kilometers behind where the pro-Ukrainian deep state map has had its last update. So the Russians have advanced until here. Again, as usually, that we have a geolocalization there doesn't mean they are there at this very moment. It usually shows them being engaged, which can be successful, but still mean the Russian hold the position there. But we do know that they have advanced up until here. They also advanced close to Lukyansky. Further to the east, we have geolocalizations here, which is more or less here in this area, so we could expect the Russian front line to go at least until here. Pro-Russian channels claim that the two bridgeheads, if we want it this way, the two incursions are already connected. I do not see anything close to the proof, so this seems to be complete nonsense, at least as of now. The Russians have captured Bukarovka, though. We have here an admission by a pro-Ukrainian mill blogger, Petrenko, who says that it had fallen to the Russians. So this whole area he attributes now to the Russians. This town is now in Russian hands as well. The Russians are also gaining additional ground here in Vovchansk. I have several geolocalizations here as well. We have them here. Already several roads, crossroads into the town. We have them here in the northern part, and more conclusive is the one down here. There's a hospital they have occupied, so we have them here and roughly here. So I guess we could assume at the very least that this should be under Russian control as of now. So what is it? At least a third of the northern part here north of the river. This is at the very least what the Russians hold now. To go back on the map. Roughly this area should be under Russian control as of now. Obviously, it can extend further to the east. In the last situation report, we had the Russians here, but as of now, we do not know how much of this is actually fully under their control. Then we have further to the east, on the eastern front, we have some developments as well. The Russians are advancing there as well at Kislivka, here in the area. The Russians have advanced here in this area along the railroad. They have advanced by roughly 400 meters from what I've seen. Further south at Krochmalne, the Russians have also advanced. They gained these tree lines here, and I think they gained some additional ground. Let me quickly check. This should be it here. You can see it's Krochmalne is here, and this is this formation here. Which is not on it, but I think they should be down to here by now. So the Russians gained another roughly kilometer, a little more than a kilometer, by the Ukrainians losing those tree lines here at this point. Further south, I cannot record any change in territory until the Seversky Donetsk. Here, the fighting is continuing. The Russians are pushing towards Seversk, but surprisingly enough, the only change we have is in favor of the Ukrainians. We have them here, close to Vesele. The Russians strike Ukrainians in this tiny piece of wood, and this is down here. So this is, at least temporarily, had Ukrainian presence again. Probably a Ukrainian counterattack being successful here. The Russians have pushed significantly, attacked Chasiv Yar over the last few days with big attacks, but I cannot record any change. So while they did mechanized attacks again, while they keep Chasiv Yar under fire with artillery and glide bombs, they do not seem to have had any success in those attacks. So let's switch over to the next area where we do have some changes. This is Avdiivka, and here again we have some changes, both that is being recorded. Nitailove, we have them reaching the outermost area here, but at the same time the Russians have also, let me see, where is it? No, that was not it. The Russians have also pushed in this direction here and have been geolocalized here and here. So it seems they are advancing not just at Netailovis, but somewhere north of it as well. And in the last situation report, I've shown you that the Russians were here as well. And the one before, they were roughly here. So that doesn't, as said, that usually doesn't mean automatically that it's under their control, but the front line is probably reaching this area now. The gray area that we see here is area where the Russians have operated within the last week, more or less. Further south, we do not have any change that I can record in Krasnohorivka. It seems to be stable for the moment, at least. Here also no change. No change in the area, even at the Oblast border. I do not see any fresh changes. Now, there are claims of advances, but nothing that can be proven. So the front line seems to be stable here, but if we go to the Orikhiv area, here we do have some change in the direction, just to orient you, here in the direction of Huliapole, the Russians managed to advance roughly until here along the road. We have geolocalization here. You see that the road makes a turn here, and then it's, let's say, 30-40% in the direction towards Huliapole. So this is the road here taking a turn and then roughly until here. So the Russians have advanced up to here in latest geolocalizations. They have also advanced inside of Robotine. Now the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that they had captured Robotine, and even Russian mill bloggers have declined that in between. We do have additional advances though that were geolocalized. The Russians have been spotted here and they have been spotted here. So the latest positions of the Russians are roughly here in this area. Probably some Ukrainian presence still in the furthermost areas like this here, but this here should be more or less under Russian control as of now. So we are probably reaching 80% of the town in Russian hands as of now. The development is continuing from what we've seen over the past few weeks. Nothing new from the Dnipro, so we skip directly to the Crimean Peninsula. Here drones, and here the Crimean Peninsula was attacked with drones and with ATACMS. The Russians claimed 5 shot down ATACMS, 2 drones and 11 naval drones. To what degree these numbers are true is obviously always somewhat disputed. There are some videos of Russian helicopters shooting at drones, so they probably destroyed some, but what they did not manage to do is destroy every ATACMS. Those are videos from Belbek, and we see 2 destroyed planes here still on the runway. We see a destroyed fuel depot at this point, and in the other pictures we also see additional damage. For instance, it's weird that this should be a Sukhoi 27. If we look at the back here, that this is still in place is extremely unlogical unless it's no longer flyable, as the Ukrainians likely use cluster munitions at this in those attacks. While we might not see obvious damage, it should probably be fairly penetrated with a lot of shrapnel. So the question whether or not this can be repaired can obviously not be answered by a satellite picture, but at least it's somewhat unlikely if this area has been shelled with cluster munitions here overall, because when we look at this we see fire damage. What we do not see is big craters. So the Ukrainians used cluster munition, and that spreads a huge amount of shrapnel around, and as planes are not made to take hits and to have the armor to withstand hits, they are easily penetrated, which does tremendous damage. So this plane is very likely for the scrapyard as well. At best, they can take some spare parts out of it. Here is another one that is still there and clearly shows, half of it is missing. So this one is another one destroyed, and there are videos of it, of the area where we see the damage here. And this is interesting. Now you see plane here, here, and here. This one is gone. This one is still here, and this one is still here, and we see a hit here. Those 2 planes are likely, again, hit by shrapnel. If they are still there after the airbase was attacked, after the Russians know they can't successfully have a 100% interception rate, they don't leave high-value planes there. So those planes are at the very least damaged, if not for the scrapyard. And the interesting part of all of this, the important part, is what we see in these pictures here. Those are MiG-31. Those are the developments, the successor of the MiG-25. It's Russia's fastest combat plane and interceptor that is needed both in the north, in the Arctic, because of its high speed. But the Russians use it now in the current war for 2 purposes. A, as a Kinzhal launching platform. The high speed, the powerful engines help lift the Kinzhal and get it up to speed to extend the range. And they use it as an interceptor against Ukrainian Sukhoi 25 over the Black Sea, as the Ukrainians like to strike Sevastopol with Storm Shadow that are air launched, and for that they fly in this direction. In this regard, when they spot it, they want to intercept it, they need the fastest plane they can get, and the MiG-31 is this. Now they have at the very least lost 2 in those strikes, and this is important because they are no longer in production. Russia is bleeding planes here that at least as of now, it cannot replace. On the other hand, they probably still have over 100 of those. So this is not a war-winning move or something like this, even though it is a painful loss for the Russians. To come to the overall situation now, when we talked about the defensive lines in the north here, I quoted you Ukrainian officers who complained about the lack of defensive lines. There are pictures of dragon teeth flying around, but not in position. So there was a lot of doubt, and even in pro-Ukrainian circles, it was spread that the defensive lines might not even exist because corruption made sure that they can't be built. I mentioned in those videos that we'll have to see, because it's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians built heavy fortifications directly at the front line, where their machinery would be struck by the Russians, even with mortars, where every pioneer that would lay mines might be, every engineer might be attacked with FPV drones. So I said that we should expect the lines somewhat south, and the big question will be whether they'll be able to hold. Now, Ukraine has, according to its officials, built 3 defensive lines. The first one, for that very reason, is not at the front line, but 12 to 13 kilometers behind the front line. So the longest, the deepest Russian advances are roughly at 10 kilometers now, which means that they are reaching the first solid defensive line that Ukraine has. They are claiming the second one is at 20 kilometers distance, and the strongest one is even further back, and it's the strongest because there they could use all the heavy equipment without being molested at the same time. They are saying those lines aren't even reached yet, but we'll have to see how much of this is true and how well those hold, but we'll just see in the future. As said, it confirms basically what I suspected, and it showed that it was the right decision not to judge immediately. We have some news from Ukraine, though, and that is somewhat weird. Zelensky says, for the first time in years of the war, none of the brigades complains that there is no artillery projectile. And this has been happening for the last 2 months. So according to him, for 2 months, they're already no longer lacking artillery shells. The problem is that we don't really see that along the front line. We see more artillery fire by the Ukrainians, but this is one message that is being spread around in pro-Ukrainian circles. So in this context, I felt like this must be nonsense, and I just want to quote Tatarigami here, a Ukrainian officer who is widely quoted by observers, and he says this is out of touch with reality and a result of positive reporting promotion in the top brass. Now, it would have helped with the click rate probably to say ammunition problems are over, but I think that's nonsense. The ammo situation for the Ukrainians has surely been improved, but if they don't lack shells, then only because they lack tubes, because they might have lost so many artillery pieces that the small amount of artillery shells that arrived are actually enough for the tubes, as unfortunately we have seen a lot of Ukrainian artillery pieces being lost in the past few weeks. Still though, the situation is clearly improving, that much is clear, but we should not believe, this seems to be complete and utter nonsense, that the Ukrainians suddenly have enough ammo. The situation will improve, it is currently improving, it will get better, but to reach a point where there's no more lack whatsoever is unrealistic at this very moment. There's also additional information about the invasion here in the north. The Ukrainians say that when the Russians came in, the Russian electronic warfare was so effective that Ukraine was no longer able to use Starlink. They lost connection to their drones. They could no longer fly their drones, and for communication they had to switch over to radio and telephones, as the Starlink system, their internet usage was gone. They were no longer able to do tactical reconnaissance either, another sign of the problems they were facing. But we have good news in this regard. We have here Slatkov, a Russian mill blogger, saying that the situation is getting a little more difficult because the enemy has placed mines everywhere and the sappers have a lot of work. Again, the Ukrainian officer said no mines whatsoever, no defensive line, everyone just ran away. As soon as they come a few kilometers south, suddenly the Russians start complaining about the mines. So we see that the Ukrainians basically didn't build up much fortifications along the front line as they basically, the soldiers there only had the job to delay the front line. Not too much of a surprise, but now we have increasingly the confirmation. So it seems unlikely that the Russians keep marching further south. I said when I talked about this, we have to wait how the attacks will develop, and I'm getting increasingly confident that this was the proper way. We should expect the Russians to slow down. The amount of soldiers they are committing so far is far from any number that would be sufficient to seriously threaten Kharkiv. So what we see right now is likely them just pushing the Ukrainians away from the front line, and their offensive should have its culmination point fairly soon. Let's switch over to the troop generation. Russia will, according to Putin, spend 8.7% of its GDP for the military. He was saying this is a lot, but it's still less than what the Soviet Union did in the 1980s, where they spent 13%. And the we need to talk about Russian economy as well, as we're talking about the amount of money being spent for the defense. Now, there were a lot of sanctions. Russia is the most sanctioned country in the history, according to analysts and according to some numbers. And obviously that led to hopes of the Russian economy collapsing. Now, Russian economy is actually growing, and a lot of people take this as a proof that the sanctions have been useless. But the fact is that the significant part, or basically the growth, is because of investments in the defense industry and of money being spent there. And this is good news for everyone on Russia's side, unless that person has heard about Frédéric Bastiat and the broken window fallacy, which basically says that spending money for destruction is money spent and thus money circulating, but it's misallocated money. If the money would have been spent, to take Russia's example, on infrastructure, on building new railway lines, on building new mines, on building new power plants, that would have actually helped Russia, whereas this is just a destruction of wealth that is happening as of now. And the Defense Committee of the Duma has refused to include fathers of 3 children into exemptions for the mobilization. So far, fathers of 4 children under 16 are included, but fathers of 3 will not be included. Now, while Russia is currently officially not raising other soldiers through a mobilization, they are currently officially only raising troops through volunteers. This is still a sign that Russia is continuing its preparation for a military conflict with the West and for an extended conflict by simply keeping their options open. As of now, we should probably not expect another wave of mobilization coming fairly soon, but we clearly can see in everything that Russia does that they want to have all the options needed for the future, and this is one of the examples for this. And we have one news from the secretary of the Ukrainian Security Council, and he's saying that the Russians will have enough tanks and armored vehicles for a year and a half if the tempo of the current operations are continuing. So even according to Ukraine, the Russians will not run out of tanks and IFVs at the current level. The current level will not be reduced for 1 year and a half from now. Ukraine has some troop generation as well, though. Ukroboronprom, the national defense industry, said they increased their production by a factor of 3, and in some areas they want to increase the production in 2024 by a factor of 10. They have increased the artillery shell production massively and currently are starting 60mm mortar round production as well. So Ukraine does its best to help itself with its own artillery production, artillery shell production as well. And Zelensky has signed the law to recruit prisoners. Ukraine will not recruit murderers like capital crimes, basically, but lower grade crimes were, to say it simply, probably where the public is not that much in danger, will be allowed. And according to claims from Ukraine, 5,000 prisoners are volunteering, want to fight for Ukraine, according to the numbers that is being spread around. I have no idea how close they are to the truth, but this would obviously mean manpower for another brigade, more or less. And in international support, we have the United States setting up a $2 billion defense enterprise fund that will be used for the purchase of weapons, but I think inside of Ukraine. So from my understanding, this will finance Ukraine's own production in a way that the Ukrainians will be able to pay their own defense industry, but it will also invest into the defense industry, probably through new machines, and it will provide Ukraine with money to buy weapons from the United States and other countries. And from Rheinmetall in Germany, we have the news that 40 Marders will start to being delivered now to Ukraine, 40 additional Marder IFVs until September. So delivery has started now. 40 in total will be delivered until September. But that was already it from me for now. If you enjoyed this report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon and leave a comment. What do you think about the current operation in Kharkiv? Do you think the Russians will stop soon, or do you actually expect Kharkiv to be threatened? This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.